Welcome to the Mastering Show. No, it doesn't really work, does it? Hello, welcome to the Mastering Show. My name is Ian Shepherd. I'm flying solo this week. That's because this week is something a little different. It's an interview with Matt Colton from Alchemy Mastering. He's the engineer who mastered the winner of this year's Dynamic Range Day Award, which is the new James Blake album, The Colour of Anything. And I played about 10 minutes of excerpts on that on the webcast for DRD last week, but we talked for well over an hour, and I thought you guys would like to hear that. So almost all of it is here for you to listen to. I want to say thanks again to Matt for mastering such a great album, but also for doing the interview. He had his 4-month-old daughter asleep on his chest for most of it. She wakes up about halfway through, and I've left some of that in, mainly because it would be a lot of work to take her out, and she doesn't really get in the way of the conversation, I'm sure you'll agree. So if you didn't listen to the Dynamic Range Day broadcast, perhaps I should quickly tell you the award is given not to the most dynamic album of the year, although especially in modern terms this is a very dynamic album, but to the best sounding dynamic album. And if I'm honest, I would say the best sounding mainstream dynamic album. The aim of the award is to help prove that you don't need to crush your music in order to compete, in order to sell loads of copies. I'm looking for examples that prove that dynamic is the new loud. And I think this album is a perfect example of that. So without further ado, here is my interview with Matt. Matt, hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. And you know now the reason I'm calling you is because this album by James Blake has won the Dynamic Range Day Award 2016, and you were the mastering engineer on that. So congratulations for your part in that.
Well, thank you very much. And that's fantastic. That's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, and I don't know how much contact you have with James, but maybe if you can pass on the message to him, let him know. That might be fun for him to know as well.
Yeah, no, I absolutely will. Not least because the dynamic range was driven, very much by him. It was, at his insistence on making this album very, very dynamic. It was part of his kind of vision for the record. So I think, not trying to speak for him, but I'm sure he will be, delighted to know that. I mean, he wanted it that way for himself, for his own listening pleasure, as well as him thinking it was the best way to communicate his ideas. And the fact that people like yourself have kind of, it's obviously worked, basically. It resonates with people like yourself. So I'm sure he'll be delighted, because it was fully intentional and part of his kind of artistic vision, if you like. So I absolutely will be, I'll speak to him in the next couple of days and let him know.
That's brilliant. And I mean, it's the risk of being hideously corny. That is literally music to my ears, because, that's the kind of thing we want to hear, is that, artists understand the benefits of going for a more dynamic sound and kind of follow that through. And it's great to hear. So did he come into work with you? Was it an attended session?
No, not on this occasion. So James and I have worked together. I've mastered sort of 99% of the records that he's made. We first worked together probably sort of 2008, 2009, something like that. Initially doing, all of the work, attended, and this time round, and we did an EP about a year ago, or something like that, which was also unattended. I think partly because we've worked together so much, he knows me, he trusts me, and we've kind of, our communication has become pretty good in terms of knowing, I kind of know roughly what I think he's going to want, and he's very comfortable in kind of directing me from a distance as well. So for those reasons, and also because he was actually spending quite a lot of time in LA during the mastering of this record, actually took place over about 3 months, I would say.
Really? Okay.
So yeah. I mean, we started it mid-January. We always knew it was going to be, I mean, mostly with album mastering, I'm sure it's probably, the same with you. With me, it's kind of like a sort of 1 to 2 day process, in general. Usually you sort of, start in the morning, you kind of finish by, sort of early evening, and then, that's kind of day one, and then, there'll be a second day of sort of recalls and tweaks and, running out parts and that kind of thing. And that's normally what happens. We always knew that this album wasn't going to be like that, partly because the second, so this is James's third album, James's second album, we also did over a period of months. And the mastering process is part of the way that James kind of finishes up, if you know what I mean. So it's, he'll get things to a point, and then we'll master it and kind of put, a sort of work in progress album together, and then that will help him to kind of just sort of fully refine the ideas, if you know what I mean. So then, there'll be a case of going back to mixes and. So
he's listening to what you do, then maybe making some revisions and coming back and sending you new mixes and stuff.
Yeah, I think, I mean, when you're sort of making a record, and especially so James writes everything himself, plays every instrument, programs every single beat, records it all himself, mixes it himself, do you know what I mean? So it's very much, although he's got a sort of artistic overview, I think probably the kind of sonic overview, it's too difficult to sort of have that, or to have that kind of perfect, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And so it's a case of, so in sort of mid-January, I mastered all of the tracks, and there were more tracks. It's a long album anyway, but I think there's 3 or 4 tracks that we also mastered, that aren't actually on the record as well. So it was a big body of work, and that kind of first stage, as well as from my point of view, is about trying out a few different sort of signal paths, and trying to get in my head how I felt the album should sound. So it was useful for me, but for James and also his management and stuff, it was a case of bringing all the tracks together so that they were all a kind of uniform loudness and a sort of uniform tonality, so that they could then start, well, how does this become an album? Do you know what I mean? The running order and everything else, and from there some mixes changed, some arrangements changed, and various other things. Where we just kind of slowly refined it. I mean, when I say that the mastering took 3 months, obviously it wasn't, I wasn't mastering every day for 3 months. Was, I think, there were sort of 4 main sessions, if you like, sort of 4 kind of day-long sessions, and then various sort of tweaks, in between. Some tracks, we used from the very first session, that was, everything about them was perfect and sort of remained unchanged onto the album. And various other things we just kind of tweaked along the way. But the dynamics were all the way along. It was very, very important to James that, this wasn't a loud record.
Was that something that was new on this album? Had he been moving in that direction? Because the previous album wasn't stupid loud, but it was somewhat louder, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I don't know if you listened to the first album. The first album's really loud. So the first album, his mixes were extremely loud, and it was kind of coming out of kind of dubstep and club music, and was still very much. It was that kind of record with hints of songs and hints of ballads on there and that kind of thing, but very much, more towards the kind of sort of club and, sort of banging, heavy bass kind of dubstep sort of sound. So that was very loud, and we consciously moved away from it for the second one, because it got more songy, and that was something that kind of, I guess it was conscious in my mind, because basically when I tried to make it as loud as the first one, it just killed the record. And James, I don't think had particularly thought about it, but we just tried a few things, and he liked the more dynamic sound of the Overgrown album relative to the first album. Whereas with this one, he was very much all the way along, Matt, just back off those limiters, back off that compression, we don't need it, and it was very interesting. I mean, it was a period where I was actually working on another very big album, big in terms of number of tracks and everything else. It was also another sort of successful electronic music artist in the EDM genre, and that album I also mastered over several sessions, probably again over 2 months, and that had the complete opposite brief. That was literally, this needs to be the loudest record ever made. And I was, some days, I'd do a day on this record and then the next day on James Blake, and it was a learning experience, for me.
Completely different mindset.
Completely different mindset, and actually quite difficult as well, and sometimes, it's just, sort of difficult to, kind of rein back in on James's record and then ramp back up to the other one. But ultimately I managed, both. They're both coming out and everyone's happy. But yeah, with James's thing, it got to the point where I actually sat down with a guy who sort of worked as, basically came in as a sort of engineering assistant, just to run out mixes and print instrumentals and that kind of thing. That's another friend of mine, and I was speaking to him, and they actually had the conversation where James had said, what's the point of the loudness? Literally, like, what I don't understand. If we don't like the way it sounds, then why?
Yeah, exactly.
The guy who was assisting him sort of, in terms of being on Spotify, on the radio, competing with other things, and James was just like, I'm just not interested. These words just that sentence means nothing to me. It's completely irrelevant.
Yeah, it doesn't work either. That's the thing. Everybody thinks that you need to do it in order for Spotify and radio, but those are exactly the places where being super loud in the first place won't help. You'll end up getting averaged out to be the same as everything else. Yeah,
exactly. No, I mean, this is the thing. So, following on from that conversation, I spoke with his manager, and we had a similar conversation. He said, are we going to be penalised in some way, in terms of when people are listening? And I said exactly what you've just said. Now because of R128 and all the other things, the sort of the whole, he was familiar with Soundcheck on iTunes, which was how I sort of explained it to him. It's like, this is kind of happening across the board, this sort of, this averaging out, and if you listen to a radio station now in the UK or in Europe, a digital radio station, and they're playing music from different decades, you listen, you hear the stuff, something that was done sort of mid-80s or something that was done, early 90s, which is then followed by a contemporary recording, and it's horrific. You just sort of, you hang your head in shame and think, well, how have we gone so far backwards? I mean, where's the snare drum gone and everything, and all the rest of it. So, his management, was then like, okay, well, then why? Let's just make it as dynamic as James wants,
Now, that is so great to hear, and for several reasons. I mean, because one thing is, of course, I'm talking to you, and obviously the person responsible ultimately for the sound of the record is James. So in a way, the award is for him. But
yes,
actually, that conversation there, you just earned the award for yourself, right? Because, that still takes guts. When somebody says, are we going to be penalized? To be able to look them metaphorically in the eye and say no, there's a lot of people who will back away from that. They'll start to kind of fudge and hedge their bets and all the rest of it. And I think, it's great that you felt able to say that and that they accepted it, that his manager kind of, believed you and went with it and went with James's vision, because that's how we get progress in all of this. The more albums like this and Random Access Memories by Daft Punk and, Uptown Funk and all of these kind of more dynamic songs, the more of them make it out into the real world and are successful even so, that's where the proof comes from. That's where, that's how more people will kind of start to take the leap, and maybe we even might get some dynamic EDM again, which would be nice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, Uptown Funk is one that, when that's an example that I, quite often use, when this kind of thing crops up. It's like, there haven't been many records that have been more successful than that in the past few years. It's pretty dynamic.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah, by modern standards especially.
Yeah, no, exactly, yeah. But I mean, in this era, and certainly considering it's a big sort of US pop record. Although, I mean, as as you said in your post, or one of your posts recently, that there is a bit of a trend in US pop. Things are stepping back. I mean, I remember checking it, a Beyonce record of 2 or 3 years ago, and was like, okay, this isn't very loud, all things considered.
It's interesting, and her new album is even less loud, actually.
I haven't checked the new one yet.
The latest album and the new Drake album are both, they're louder than James's album, and there are 2 or 3 songs on each of them that are really, really loud and distorted and stuff. But my guess is that that's how they came in from the mix. In fact, I was speaking to Chris Athens, who mastered the Drake album, and he was saying that's basically what happened. He took the loudest songs from the mix, and those were kind of his reference points. He didn't make those any louder, and then he balanced everything else relative to them.
To that,
which, and thankfully they weren't. They're still pretty loud, but they both of those albums sound really good. And I'm really hopeful that the trend. I mean, it's funny. I would never actually have thought that trend would have come from the States.
No.
But it's great to see it happening. Was it kind of a refreshing change to work on something where you weren't kind of just slamming everything, or was it kind of?
Yeah. No, I mean, just a kind of different. Just something different, which is always interesting, and a different set of. Well, I guess, I mean, when I started doing this, my approach was kind of make something sound how I want it to sound. You know what I mean? So very sort of balanced with EQ, and get the dynamics to how I want it to be. So the drums are kind of performing however I want.
You're talking about when you started mastering, yeah?
When I started mastering, which, I mean, I started in 97 when I got my first mastering job. And then I sort of, ad-limiting to try and kind of make it as sort of, loud as I could, whilst what I'd just done was intact, if you know what I mean. So you sort of make it sound good and then make it sound, as loud as you can whilst still sounding good. And, probably about 5 years ago, for a lot of work, I started working the other way around, which was, I'm going to have to make this loud. And then once I've got it to that loudness point, I'm then going to have to try and work to make it sound good. Do you see what I mean? So instead of approaching the kind of, the tonal balance first, and then the dynamics, you start by approaching the dynamics and then, seeing, how best you can kind of tidy it up afterwards.
And that's kind of completely wrong, isn't it? Because it's, I mean, I'm not, if that's how you have to work, that's how you have to work. And there's plenty of skill involved in doing that well. But that for me is taking a technical consideration first and the music coming second. Whereas
Absolutely.
what we
Completely
prefer to do is, just do the best thing for the music. And then, yes, you have to get all the technical details right, and you make it technically as good as you can as well. But ultimately, it's about the music. It's about the sound.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And that's, I mean, obviously, it's not the case that I would do that on every session. I mean,
No.
I work mostly on contemporary music, I would say, probably 70% contemporary music, and by that I mean, kind of upfront pop and dance and all that kind of stuff, which is, where traditionally, as you know, we kind of get asked to kind of push things. Mm-hmm. But obviously not everything that I do, I would approach with that mindset. I mean, for me, the dynamics have to be appropriate for the recording and the style of music and, all those kinds of things. But yeah, it's really, really nice, when you get something like this, whereby, the only dynamic processing that we used was just because we like the sound of it. Do you know what I mean? And that's, that was the only reason for using any dynamics processing.
That's how it should be.
Yeah. No, quite. And
the great news is that's gonna have the best, because I mean, you were saying, that it's nice that somebody like me can appreciate it, but it's not just kind of me in my ivory loudness tower. As soon as I started mentioning this, I got a ton of replies back from people going, yes, absolutely, it sounds amazing. And a lot of the reviews have mentioned how, sophisticated the production is, not in a kind of overly produced, kind of bland kind of way that some people might think, but just saying, it's clever, it's inventive, it works musically. And of course, all of that comes from James, but also you have to, make sure that makes it onto the final master. So
yes, absolutely. And one thing that really struck me, and in fact, it was on the track with Bonnie Bear, I Need a Forest Fire. Originally we had a more compressed version of that. And, which I really liked. It had a kind of a body to it. It had a sort of solidity. And I've been listening to it in the car, and it's a great track. It's a wonderful piece of music. It's great vocals and, lovely hooks. And, it's obviously one of the high points of the record. And I really felt that we'd cracked it. And then we decided to, sort of back the limiting off. I think we took about 2.5 dB, off the gain on the limiter. So, I mean, limiting wise, often on the record, there's none. Probably, for the most part, it's kind of 1.5 to sort of 3 dB of limiting. And kind of that's it. I mean, there's the occasional sort of massive, like, synth-based sweep or something like that, which, might have a little bit more than that. But, so we then sort of back the limiting off on this track by 2.5 dB. So it's really just a tickle of limiting which is the version that's on the album. And I just put that on in the car, and I was just driving around sort of late at night, and just stuck it on, and I was stunned at how much there were backing vocals that I hadn't heard before. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. There was things going on, and there's quite a lot of stereo in the vocals on that track. Not panning, but sort of kind of broad stereo and that kind of thing. And it all just appeared, and there was so much that I hadn't heard, because the sort of the dynamic reduction that we had smushed everything together, and yes, we'd kind of got some more body into the track by bringing up those, bringing the average level up, if you like, bringing up the sort of lower, quieter bits, but it just meant that we lost definition on something that it turns out was like of fundamental importance. And yeah, it was was like a light bulb moment. At that point, we kind of set the dynamics for the album, or this kind of overall loudness, I should say. It was that kind of defined it, because it's like, oh, okay, right, yeah, that's what we're doing. Right, that's the record that we're making.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I'm so pleased about, is that actually, because I'm hoping that this will get lots more publicity and people will talk about this, and maybe it'll be another landmark album in the sort of the process. That's my hope. Maybe I'm just being kind of pipe dreaming. But even if that happens, I'm pretty sure some people are going to come back and go, yeah, but it's a quiet record. It's an atmospheric record. It's meant to be quiet. It's not meant to be that loud. And I mean, I kind of have two replies to that. I mean, one, yes, that's right, but the loud moments are really loud.
Yeah.
So it's not like, that the big moments aren't held back. It's not, and there are some big moments on there, even though overall it's quite mellow and it's quite chilled out and atmospheric. But the kind of the paradox about that is actually it would have been quite easy technically to make it 2 or 3 dBs louder. And most people, like you, when you had that louder version, you wouldn't know what was missing. You only know that when you hear the comparison. When it's given that extra little bit of space to breathe, suddenly that's when it kind of leaps out at you. And I know exactly what you mean. It's part of that 3-dimensionality thing. I always think this sometimes when I'm watching, because I've done some Blu-ray authoring, and so I've got a decent sized TV at home. But hand on heart, if I'm sitting there watching everyday TV, can I tell the difference between the pristine Blu-ray picture and a decent DVD? Maybe not, except that suddenly I realized I could. And the thing that surprised me was it was not in a clarity way in terms of looking at the picture. It was to do with the depth of the image. I could see things further back. I was more aware of the composition of scenes, or the contrast between the foreground and the background and all the rest of it. And that's where that kind of extra, quotes, resolution in the image worked visually. And I kind of think the same thing applies to audio, except that we're not talking about resolution. It's about dynamics. It's about, the peak to loudness ratio, having that. And I just think it does it. Yeah. You can just hear more of everything. Yeah.
And it does. I mean, in layman's terms, the more you compress something, the less front to back perspective you have, the less depth perspective. I mean, this is, with one of the things, whenever, people are talking to me about multi-channel audio, one of the things I always say is, you can get 3-dimensional audio from 2 speakers. A stereo setup will give you, it doesn't just give you left to right, it doesn't just give you, height information, but, if it's done well and if it's a good recording, you will get front to back, and, you will get a sense of, depth in the audio. And obviously, that is what you lose or, erode with, the more compression that you have. And this particular record is a great example of that, I mean, I liked your comment, which I completely agree with, which is, after you've been listening for 5 minutes, you go to the volume control and you turn it up because you're engaged and you're enjoying it, and you want more. And the good thing is you turn it up and it doesn't get hard, or it doesn't get brittle, it doesn't get fatiguing, because it's not, just sort of 8K square waves, being drilled into your brain.
Yeah. It just gets better. And it's that kind of weird thing of, all of this is supposed to have happened because louder is better, but it's louder at the volume control, not in the file, not in the digits.
Yeah, well, it's because, everything's got louder, but the dynamic ratio is unchanged because you turn up the amplifier. You haven't had to sort of artificially, raise the average level to make it feel louder. As you probably know, I cut a lot of vinyl records, cut a lot of vinyl masters, and it's one of the most enjoyable things about that process is we can, make more dynamic perversely, I mean, this is how ridiculous it is. Vinyl, which has a far worse signal to noise ratio than even a 16-bit, sort of digital recording.
Yeah.
Yet we can make it more dynamic. Partly because no one really knows what we're doing. Do you know what I mean?
You can get away with it.
Well, you can get away with it. There's no one looking over my shoulder saying, is this going to be as, loud as the Metallica album or whatever? You never really have that conversation when you're cutting vinyl. So, you can take all the limiters off or whatever and just, the dynamics processing that you have on the cut is just what you want for the sound, and you kind of cut it. If you want to cut it louder, then you add gain to it, and I think that's, so I was slightly digressed here, but I think that's one of the reasons, part of the reason at least, as to why there's been a sort of vinyl renaissance, or why certainly some people think that vinyl might sound better or have a different sound, is that, actually, when it's done well, it probably is a bit more dynamic. And so it is a bit less fatiguing to listen to. And so you do listen for a bit longer and you get more engaged. That's a digression.
I think that's true. It's something that I say to people, and it's not, I love vinyl. I grew up with vinyl. I can't bear the end of side distortion, but otherwise I'm not happy with the rumble and the clicks and the pops and all that kind of stuff. And just the whole, the artwork and putting it there and feeling the needle drop on the record, all of that. There's all of those reasons that people might prefer the sound of vinyl, but the sound that goes onto the vinyl is probably more important. And so my advice to people is master your CD as though it were going to vinyl.
Completely.
I've had plenty of masters over my career that got sent off to Abbey Road and Heathman's and wherever and got cut flat, because that's how I was trained, and it still works. And if more people cut their CDs as though they were going to be cutting to vinyl, a big chunk of this problem would just kind of magically vanish overnight.
Well, this is it. I guess the thing is, if we're saying that, one of the things people are enjoying about the sound of vinyl is that it's more dynamic. Well, that isn't vinyl specific. There's in quite the opposite. Which is what dynamic range data is all about. Is that we can be that dynamic with digital, and in fact, it's more appropriate to be that dynamic with digital because we don't have the noise floor down at 40 dB below the kind of peak of the signal. Do you know what I mean? It's the noise floor is twice as low as that, or whatever. We don't have clicks and all that kind of thing. So it's even more appropriate on digital.
Yeah, if they would cut a CD as though it was going to vinyl, it could sound even better.
Exactly. So
well, let's keep our fingers crossed that that's the way that it's going to go, because and thank you and James for kind of playing a part in that. Who knows? Maybe it could be quite a big part. I think this record deserves to be hugely successful. I hope it will be.
Yes, yeah, me too. Let's
hope that the trend continues in future. Just for anybody listening, you work at Alchemy Mastering, right? Yeah.
So Alchemy is myself, Barry Grint, and Phil Kinraid, we've got a little complex of studios in West London that we put together 4 years ago, and just an independent company that the three of us own, and it's going really well. Touching lots of wood here, but we work on a sort of wide variety of projects, and quite a lot of different kinds of music, it's. I was just chiming in here, and it's going pretty well, I think.
Fantastic. So, how did you get into mastering?
I got into mastering. I worked in a radio station.
Oh.
So I got a job in a radio station when I was 19. They took me on as a YTS, youth training scheme, as it was, so a sort of internship equivalent. Is what it would be today, to work in the commercial production department. For some reason, they thought that I would, be kind of useful in writing radio commercials. partly because I think I told them that I would be, because that's what they were looking for, and I really needed a job. And we tried that, but actually I was pretty terrible at writing radio commercials. But
writing music or writing scripts? No,
writing scripts. Yeah.
Okay.
But we used to make the commercials on site, so we made commercials for 4 radio stations, and we had a studio which had sort of 3 Revoxes in it, some CD players, some cart machine, analog cartridge machines, and a desk in it. I can't remember what kind of desk it was. I'd basically been playing, drums and guitar from the age of 12, and playing in bands and, playing gigs, putting on gigs, and, made a couple of demos, in a couple of sort of reasonable studios and all that kind of stuff. And, I'd got into programming a few years before, just on an Atari computer, piece of software called Music X, which, was just a little MIDI sequencer. So I was kind of doing all of that. And, the radio station was kind of the closest sort of thing to working in music that, I had found at that point in time in Somerset, which is where I was from, where I am from. So the fact that there was this kind of studio with, a desk in it and microphones and kind of bits of equipment, obviously that kind of, really resonated with me. So I sort of managed to kind of become the guy who made all the commercials fairly quickly, actually. I think I sort of had a natural aptitude for it, as well as, really wanting to do it. And, from there, I ended up, making jingles and making programs for the shows, and then driving outside broadcasts, and then, I had my own show, and assisted on other shows. So, just kind of general sort of studio-based kind of technical roles within the radio station. I met a couple of people there. Interestingly enough, Jeremy Kyle used to work there. He was a good friend of mine.
Oh, yeah.
So I used to help him out on his Saturday show before he went off and became uber famous as the Jeremy Kyle that we know and love today. Yeah. And another guy had a show on Sundays. His name is Mike Marsh, and he's a mastering engineer
at the Exchange.
And at the Exchange. And so the radio station was in South Somerset, and Mike is from Devon, and he had a house in Devon, but he would work in London Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at the Exchange, and then, come back to Devon and spend the weekends in Devon. And he, he's a big radio kind of nut, and he had a show on Sundays, and I had a show on Saturday nights, and through the radio station we met. And he's a cool guy. He's someone I sort of looked up to, and we used to go out to beers every now and then, that kind of thing. And I remember being in the pub with him, one weekend, and he got a phone call, on his sort of mobile phone. It's pretty cool that he had a mobile phone. I found that quite.
This is like a brick, was it, at that point?
Yeah, sort of 1995, big analog, suitcase, mobile phone. But he took a phone call, and he was just sort of like, so you two want to book me for 2 weeks in June? I'm on holiday. Can you see if they can wait till like beginning of July? And this was, like I say, this was 1995. So U2, whatever you think about U2, in 1995 they were the biggest band in the world. There's probably no question about that. And so sort of he finished the phone call, and I was like, I'm sorry, what do you do? You've just told U2 that they have to wait for 2 weeks because you're on holiday. What do you do?
I want to do that.
Well, it was like, I have to reassess what I think about you. You're a nice guy who has a radio show, is what I thought you were. But it turns out there's a lot more to you. And and so he told me, he was a mastering engineer. He worked in the studio, called the Exchange in London, and he invited me to kind of come and sort of hang, for a day. So I went in and sat in with him, for a few hours, and sat on the big sofa in the back of the room with the enormous speakers and the cutting lathes and the analog EQs and the tape machines, and it's like, well, this is my idea of heaven. I have no idea what you're doing and what's going on, but there's all this like really interesting, sexy looking kit. It's records are being cut. The music sounds incredible out of these enormous speakers, and you've got your feet up on the desk. This is just, everything about this is exactly what I want from my life. So I was like, okay, great. So I want to be you. So that's what I want to do with my life. So how do I get a job as a mastering engineer? And he was like, well, I don't really know. I guess just have a look in the back of Music Week. And so, because I worked in the radio station, we used to get Music Week every week, and so the next copy came along, and I had a look in the back, and there was an advert for a trainee to start at a London-based mastering studio. So I applied for that and got the job, and that was a place called Porky's Mastering, which was no longer there, but it's sort of kind of legendary studio in the middle of Soho.
Yeah.
It was kind of at the time, it's like, oh, okay, so it's as easy as that, basically. Looking back, obviously, I mean, I don't read Music Week kind of religiously anymore, but, I'm well aware that there's not many jobs for sort of trainee mastering engineers kind of appear in the back of Music Week.
Well, especially not at somewhere like the caliber of Porky's. So for that to be there in the week that you just happened to look.
It literally was, when you sort of think, I don't know what your own personal beliefs are or anyone else's, but fate, karma, whatever, you sort of think the universe had a plan for me that day. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, that's very cool.
This is obviously what I was supposed to do, and don't get me wrong, there's been kind of hard times, and it's not been like sort of all plain sailing ever since then. But certainly so basically I was 21 when I started at Porky's.
That's interesting because I always say to people that I'm unusual because I started out as a mastering engineer. Lots of people do other stuff and then get into mastering. But I was trained as a mastering engineer pretty much from the ground up as well. So it sounds like we've had quite a similar path in that way. Exactly. A lot of people obviously come to it from other kind of recording disciplines and all the rest of it. And I never have. I've never like professionally recorded anything or professionally mixed anything. I've done a fair amount of unprofessional recording and mixing, for my own, doing stuff for free or for mates and my own stuff. Literally, I pretty much only ever been a mastering engineer. Well, it's also interesting because I don't know whether you've read Ken Scott's book, but he talks about the early days of Abbey Road and the fact that everybody there started out in the cutting room. You did the tape library first, then you did the cutting room, and it was only when you completely understood the limitations of the format, because back then it was all vinyl, then you were allowed to go into the studio and do the stuff that was going to go onto that format. And I think that's helped me because I have done a bit of recording and mixing over the years. And I think it's actually really useful to have a kind of detailed understanding of the end of the process in order to do a good job to what leads up to it. So if you ever did go into that, well, I bet your kind of home recordings sound as good, if not better, than a lot of professional recordings.
I don't know about that, but I mean, certainly I think I probably have a better idea of what I'm trying to do, when I'm doing some recording. I mean, I do, it's one of the reasons, in fact, that, when I do stuff of my own is, in fact, so that I have some understanding of what my clients are doing, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So, I remember when Ableton came out, and playing on that periodically, just so that, I don't ever want to be sat in my studio and just have no idea what my clients are talking about, and no idea what they've been through. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, I need to know, not be an expert on everything, but I need to have some understanding. I mean, basically, mastering, a large part of it is kind of empathy. Do you know
mm-hmm.
what I mean? It's trying to understand, what your clients are trying to achieve, and any way that you can kind of, build up your rapport and your kind of empathetic understanding of your clients, I think is really beneficial to your work. And so, having some idea of, synthesizers and sampling and all these other things, microphones and mic techniques, all these things that are absolutely no use to me in terms of what I do for a living on a kind of day-to-day things that I would use sort of basis. It's actually, I think, very important to have that understanding.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's useful also to having some musical knowledge, being able to so I did physics and music at university, and that the physics was kind of like quantum mechanics and thermodynamics and this, that, and the other, and the music was, harmonizing Bach chorales and learning about Mozart, Beethoven, Stravinsky, Schoenberg, and all the rest of it. But at the same time, I was into rock and pop music and dance music and all the rest of it. So I've always found it an advantage that, I can talk to an EDM artist about, the build and the drop and, like you say, synths, but at the same time, I can talk to a classical artist about, the pianissimo section after the, on the second da capo or whatever it is, understanding all of that as well. It all helps, because you're absolutely right. It's all about empathy, and it's about building a relationship. People are
and building trust and everything else, isn't it?
Yeah, because they've got to trust you with their music, haven't they? So
yeah, exactly, and that's quite a big deal. I mean, we can do a lot of damage if we get it wrong. We can, portray someone's music in a very bad light if we don't do our jobs properly. And so, I don't, I try not to take it for granted, when people are choosing to work with me. It is, there's a sort of responsibility there. It's not just, a sort of another job. Do you know what I mean? It's, to the artist, this is obviously something that's of huge importance. Something they've created and sort of, thrown a huge amount of energy and love and everything else into. I think all those kind of things are really important.
They're what makes the job interesting, aren't they?
Yeah.
And challenging and satisfying to do, But you're right, it's a huge responsibility, and we're the kind of final stage in the chain. If we get it wrong, then X thousand, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of CDs get pressed, and the files go up all around the world. And it's kind of quite scary actually when you think about it in that way. But so I try not to.
Yeah, well,
me
too. Me too.
The only other thing I was going to ask you was just whether the James Blake album is the exception to the rule, whether it's still really unusual for you to have somebody interested in dynamics and wanting more dynamic mastering, or whether you're seeing a bit of a trend, whether other people are asking for those things as well.
I would say definitely more so now than, say, 5 years ago. I think, still, I'd say, still, if people comment on the dynamics of the work that I've done, more people would be asking for me to turn it up than asking me to turn it down.
Mm-hmm.
But the number of people that are asking me to turn it down is greater now than at any time, certainly in the last 5 years, I would say. Probably in the last 10 years. So, I do think it's changing, and I do think, I'm really pleased about R128. I think that's made a huge difference, because it was always a myth about how loud things are on the radio anyway, in terms of, if you make it more compressed, it's going to sound louder on the radio.
It all went through broadcast processing anyway, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But now, now that there is an actual kind of, specification, and it does actually work as well. You can just go back and say, no, that isn't the case. There's enshrined in, EBU law. So, that's really helped. And, it's amazing that, people like Spotify have, followed suit. And I believe YouTube as well. I mean, I know you've looked into this, haven't you?
Yeah, YouTube. It's a little bit flaky on YouTube. They, especially with back catalogue, not everything goes through. But yeah, I mean, here's the ironic thing. If you there's a playlist that I put together that's in a blog post somewhere where there is a song from I think the Drake album. There's a song from James's album, and there's a song from the new Radiohead album, which is a kind of much more old school, heavily crushed. I mean, it still sounds good, but it's much louder, by like 5 or 6 dBs louder. But on YouTube, you listen to those three back to back. The loudness is similar, and to be honest, the loudest moments of "I Need a Forest Fire" are probably louder than either of the other two albums.
Really,
and it's. I mean, one of the other things that I kind of quite like about it is that it's unpredictable. I mean, ideally, I would like everybody to use R128 because I think it's the best way of matching loudness, and then it's a standard that everybody can work to. On the other hand, then you have the risks that people will try and game it if they know exactly what's going to happen when it goes out on YouTube or wherever. They can try and fake it.
Work out how to defeat it.
Yeah, whereas currently, but you just can't tell. Sound check might make it a little bit louder, YouTube might make it a little bit quieter, Spotify might make it. So it's kind of, it even reinforces more the message that it really, the loudness is irrelevant. Just make it sound good. And the music will do its thing. Yeah,
I mean the Radiohead records have always been very loud. For the most part, sounds really good. I think it would be interesting. The thing with a band like that is you do wonder, not that what they do sounds bad, but whether it could sound better.
That's the thing.
If it was done differently.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've had similar thoughts, because this is not a kind of like balls to the wall music, from start to finish. It's not AC/DC. No. It's about contrast, it's about detail. There's a lot of finesse, there's a lot of intricacy and delicacy to the actual music that for me isn't necessarily always represented by the the sonic.
I completely agree. I mean, if you go back to something like the Bends, if you like Creep, when those kind of the chugger guitar chords come in that, and when it kicks in, that really is dynamic. And it just has this huge power. And I listen to their more recent stuff and think if they could take advantage of that and use that as well as everything else they're doing, I think it would just lift it up to another level. So I agree. It's not that I kind of listen to it and think, oh, this sounds horrible. I just kind of feel like there's potential there that's being missed out on. Hopefully maybe we'll see a move by them and other people like them as well in the future. And you've done your bit to hopefully help us get there. So thank you.
Well, it'd be really interesting. I haven't seen any comments in regards to James's album that are negative when talking about the loudness or lack thereof. I mean, that's not to say that there aren't people that don't find it too quiet.
I literally haven't seen any. I've seen people, all the stuff I've seen about the sound has been positive. I mean, there's, because I've kind of gotten into little conversations about it, and there's people going, oh, well, this, giving reasons why it would work for this and not for other things. But nobody who actually kind of, I've heard who said, oh, no, it doesn't sound right. I heard one person who didn't like the kick drum sound on I Need a Forest Fire, but I'm kind of like, that's a creative decision. That's nothing to do with the loudness or the dynamics.
No, you can't please everyone.
No, well, exactly. Definitely not. Well, listen, fantastic. Thank you. That was the only, I guess, let's worry about that because I'm not about the gear. I was going to ask you what kind of processing chain you used and stuff on the albums, but I think my whole message is it ain't what you use, it's the way that you use it. So
no, I mean very, very briefly on that note, I sort of periodically change things in my studio, always because it makes a definite improvement. And then when you listen back to something you did, kind of a couple of years previously or in a different incarnation of the studio, it always sounds pretty damn good. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I probably about 2 years ago, I got a Soundtech EQ for my room, which I really like.
Uh-huh.
And, I had that alongside the passive valve EQ that I was using and was in love with it, and just stopped using the valve EQ because the Soundtech EQ sounded better, to the point where I actually took the valve EQ out and it went into a different room in Alchemy.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as is the way of these things, I had to recall something, and it was a super rush, and the valve EQ was being used in another room, and I couldn't get it back in time, so I just had to apply my recall notes to the Soundtech EQ, which is very, very different. Obviously solid state, not passive EQ, but I kind of dialed in sort of same appropriate settings. And it sounded really similar. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Because the two units sound very different and they make you work in a different way. But, kind of applying the same sort of... It was a lot closer than I thought it would be. But, to cut to the chase, on James's record, I had Soundtech EQ, occasional bits of compression from the Maslek MLA3,
mm-hmm.
The multiband. Usually there wasn't any gain reduction going on that. So having it in sort of 3-band mode, not really compressing, or maybe just like, kind of quarter dB, half dB of gain reduction on mids, just a bit of sort of 1.4 to 1. But really, that was just a bit more of a kind of shape to the sound as opposed to any actual squashing.
Mm-hmm.
And then on some of the tracks, it was the Soundtech EQ going into the dangerous compressor.
Mm-hmm.
Just a single band compressor. Plug-in wise, I think the limiting on everything was the fab filter, except for the track Modern Soul, which was the hardware L2.
Mm-hmm.
And
so just because I've been experimenting with the fab filter and I quite like it. Do you use it with the default configuration, or because there are 4 different modes you can use it in, aren't there, in the advanced tab? Do you mess around with those at all?
Yeah. No, fully tweaked.
Do you have a favourite mode? I like punchy personally.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to anything kind of electronic. Punchy does seem to respect the kick drum a little bit more, I think, and seems to work best. I mean, if you go into the presets as well, starting off with some presets as a kind of jumping off point, can be really good. So
that's interesting. I haven't played with the presets on that. Maybe I should.
Yeah, I mean, for dance stuff, I usually start. There's one called House Loud and Punchy, and that's kind of quite good for house and techno and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But with James's, I actually use one of the hip hop settings. They are fairly brutal, so I dialed in a bit more look ahead. Mm-hmm. So the look ahead, instead of being instantaneous, is a bit more like 1.5 milliseconds or something like that. Mm-hmm. I'm not looking at it right now, so I can't quite remember what the scale is. Mm-hmm. And obviously changing kind of attack and release times and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the fab filter, I think, is definitely one of the better plug-in limiters in terms of, it doesn't necessarily completely destroy the musicality of what you're doing, and there's a lot of flexibility, so you can kind of get in and, Well,
the thing I like about the Punchy as a starting point is that actually I think you're right. It's a bit more musical. It's actually harder to push it too hard. You start to push it too hard, and it starts, it'll pump or it'll start cracking up or whatever. But I quite like that. That's it's like one of my other favorites is the TC limiter.
Yeah.
You used to come with
the brick wall.
Yeah, the brick wall used to come with the System 6000, and again, I would say that they're kind of. Whereas some of the other plugins that I've tried, you can actually get very, very clean results, and you keep pushing it up and pushing it up and pushing it. And it's only when you hit bypass that you realize everything that you've lost, because it's so clean and so it's kind of. I like the fact that the TC and the Fab Filter kind of have a little bit of a sound to them when you make them work, and that can it can contribute to the overall sound of what you're working on, and B, it's kind of. It helps stop me going over the top when I'm using them.
Yeah, that's interesting actually. Yeah, I would agree with that. Quite a few sort of digital limiters, because they all sound different. That's the thing, and because it is often a necessary evil of what we're doing.
Yeah, well, I mean, to a certain extent, they can contribute positively, but especially when you have to push them hard, is when the differences become more important.
Yeah, and you can, without changing the EQ that's going into it, you can get quite different results. Yeah, which is interesting.
So, what software do you use for mastering? Using Sadie or Sequoia? Sequoia.
Yeah, Sequoia.
Is that what you've always used, or where did you?
So I switched from Sadie probably about 7 or 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm. How about speakers? What speakers do you have?
Speakers, ATC SEM 150s.
Okay.
I really like ATCs, not because they're not the nicest sounding studio monitors, if you know what I mean. I don't think they're kind of overly flattering.
Well, that's not what you want, is it? That's the funny thing about mastering speakers is it kind of in some or speakers in general. On the whole, the better the speakers, the worse they make things sound because they reveal all the problems that you might not notice on a cheaper pair.
Yeah, I mean, I found, at Alchemy when it was at Centre Point, I was working on B&Ws and kind of everything sounded pretty good. And then, up at Air we had. The Pioneer TAD reference ones, it's a crazy pair of insanely good sounding hi-fi speakers.
Mm-hmm.
And again, my concern when working on really nice hi-fi speakers is whether I'm actually kind of leaning into it enough. Do you know what I mean? Or whether everything's being a bit flattered. Do you see what I mean?
I do. It's interesting because I'm still a B&W man, and I've been to Nick Watson's place, Fluid. They got PMCs. They sound really good. I think I worry that if I moved over to them, I would be tempted to overdo everything because I'd be looking for that that really big kind of voluptuous B&W sound. To a degree, it's whatever you're used to, isn't it? It's the you can adjust it to anything providing there's a certain level of quality there. But
absolutely, and obviously it's all very room dependent. But I'm very happy with the ATCs because I think they, when it sounds good, it sounds really good in the room. But I don't think they're kind of overly flattering stuff. If it doesn't sound good, then it probably isn't that great. You know what I mean?
Are all of the rooms at Alchemy set up the same, or do you have different configurations?
No.
Okay.
No.
Is it different speakers as well? Yeah, very.
Yeah. So Barry's room, he's got KEF hi-fi speakers.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and then the sort of third main room is under construction. So the third room is currently kind of a sort of prep suite, which has just got some it's a cheap pair of KRKs, which is something to hear what's
to get working on. Yeah.
You want to hear if it's playing or not. And
is there a plan for that, or are you going to audition different speakers to go in there and figure out what works?
Well, it's going to be down to Phil. I think in the first instance, it's going to be another pair of KEF hi-fi speakers.
It's a personal thing, isn't it?
Completely, yeah. If you've got to sit in front of them for 5 days a week, sort of 10, 11, 12 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you've got to get good work out of it. So, work out how best to do that. I mean,
I tell you, just something funny. That it's absolutely true. The what I say in the blog post about putting James's album on and kind of wanting to turn it up and turn it up and turn it up. It got to the point where I basically listened to probably the second half of it, and I kind of looked down and realised that actually it was smack on the mastering level in my room. And actually, I was listening to it thinking, this is exactly what I would have done with this album, which just made me smile, because it's like, that's usually the case when I hear professionally mastered stuff. I always think that's a good sign. That tells us that we're all working towards the same goal. We've all, I like that idea that actually, yes, there's taste involved and all of the rest of it, but actually, I think if you leave most pros to their own devices, they'll get results that are very much. I mean, the same with things like Daft Punk and Uptown Funk and all the rest of it, and some of the classic stuff. The Beatles remasters. You just listen to them and go, yeah, that's just right.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And congratulations on the album. The award is just one of those things, but it's a fantastic thing. I think you should be really, really proud of it. And anybody who wants to find out more about you and what you've done, is it alchemymastering.com?
It is indeed.
Yeah, and everybody head over to alchemymastering.com, check out Matt, check out his track records. So yeah, like I say, congratulations again, and thank you so much for talking to me.
No, my pleasure. No, thank you very much.
So there you go. I hope you enjoyed listening to that as much as I enjoyed actually doing the interview. And please let me know what you think of this episode. If you like it, maybe there are some other engineers I can interview in the future as well. Please head over and give us a rating and review on iTunes if you enjoyed the show. You can find more information about Dynamic Range Day at dynamicrangeday.com. And as always, the show notes for this episode are on themasteringshow.com. Do head over there, sign up for the email hot list, and come and say hello on social media if you'd like. I'm at Ian Shepherd on Twitter, and I'm on Facebook as well. Steve will be back next week. Thanks for listening.